After losing everything, an elderly woman moves into her son's house in a luxurious mansion. There she is met with cold smiles, subtle rules, and a strange sense of exclusion. Soon she realizes she is being manipulated, medicated, and gradually silenced. Now she needs to prove she is lucid before they make her disappear completely. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The sun beat down on the dirt road that snaked through the Appalachian foothills. Mrs. Irene adjusted the scarf on her head and clutched tightly to her chest the cloth bag where she carefully kept the cheese puffs she had prepared at dawn. Her fingers, calloused by decades of kneading tapioca flour, trembled slightly as the bus rattled over the potholes in the road. Beside her, a plastic bottle of sweetened coffee completed the offering she was bringing for her son. It had been 3 years since she last saw Richard, her only son, who had left the small town of Willow Creek, North Carolina, to try his luck in the metropolis of London. News of his success as a technology entrepreneur first reached her through others, neighbors who saw photos on social media, distant cousins who commented on the boy who made it. Then came the money remittances, always accompanied by short notes, increasingly formal and distant. "Next stop London Victoria Coach Station," the driver announced, pulling Irene from her reveries. 22 hours of travel separated her reality from the one she was about to encounter. As she got off the bus, she adjusted her simple floral cotton dress, which she had sewn especially for the occasion. In her bag, besides the cheese puffs, she carried a sky blue dress, her greatest pride as a seamstress, which she had made to wear to her son's wedding, a ceremony to which she had not been invited. The address she had noted on a folded and refolded piece of paper led her to Kensington, a district she only knew by reputation. Before the luxury condominium, with its imposing gates and immaculate gardens, Irene felt her heart tighten. The doorman, a man with a severe expression, examined her from head to toe. "Do you have an appointment?" "I've come to see my son, Richard Meadows. He lives in house 32. The man frowned as if in doubt. "Is your name on the authorized visitor list?" Irene didn't understand what that question meant. In the simplicity of her life, doors were always open to family. "I'm his mother, Mrs. Irene." After a tense phone call during which Irene perceived whispers on the other end of the line, the doorman finally allowed her entry, but not without first giving her a disapproving look. House 32 was, in fact, a 3-story mansion, with mirrored windows and architecture that resembled a sculpture more than a home. Irene stopped before the main door, adjusting her dress once more, suddenly feeling inadequate. Before she could ring the doorbell, the door opened. Before her stood Priscilla, the daughter-in-law she knew only from photos. Tall, slender, with perfectly aligned blonde hair cut straight at shoulder height, she wore a tailored suit that seemed to have come straight out of a magazine. "Oh," Priscilla said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you must be Richard's mother." Irene smiled, extending the cloth bag. "I brought fresh cheese puffs. They should still be warm. I wrapped them well before leaving." Priscilla's gaze dropped to the bag with an expression that mixed disgust and embarrassment. "You shouldn't have bothered," she replied, without making any move to take the gift. "Richard is in a very important meeting. I don't know if he'll be able to see you today. You should have let us know you were coming." Irene felt as if she had been slapped. 22 hours of travel, months of savings to buy the ticket, and now she was here before her son's house being treated like an intruder. "I've come so far," she murmured, her voice failing. "I just wanted to see my son for a little while." Priscilla looked around as if fearing a neighbor might witness the scene. After an irritated sigh, she stepped aside. "Come in, but through the back door. I don't want the cleaning staff to see all this road dirt." Following her daughter-in-law's curt instructions, Irene walked around the mansion, stepping on ornamental stones that hurt her feet, clad in simple sandals. The back door turned out to be the service area entrance, where Priscilla awaited her with an impatient expression. "You can leave your things here," she indicated a small wooden bench beside the laundry room. "And these bread rolls, well, I'll see if the cook can do something with them." Before Irene could protest, Priscilla took the bag from her hands and handed it to a staff member with whispered instructions. The elderly woman saw at a glance her offering being dumped directly into the bin. "You can wait in the service area. Richard should finish his meeting in a few hours, perhaps." Irene nodded, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. She sat on the indicated bench, her hands clasped in her lap, watching the staff member who was ironing clothes and giving her compassionate glances. Hours passed. The sky began to darken, and no sign of Richard. When she finally gathered the courage to ask the maid about her son, she heard a male voice coming from the living room. It was Richard. Even without seeing him, she would recognize that voice anywhere. She jumped up, her heart pounding, and walked towards the voice. She stopped at the threshold of the door separating the service area from the interior of the house, hesitant. Through the gap, she saw her son, now a man in his 30s, dressed in elegant clothes she never imagined seeing him wear. Beside him, Priscilla spoke softly in his ear, gesticulating in her direction. "She's just a confused old woman," she heard her say. "She probably saw your photos in magazines and made up this whole story. I've already called a taxi to take her away." Irene felt the world spin. Confused? How could her own daughter-in-law lie so brazenly? She took a step forward, determined to make herself seen, but Priscilla was quicker. She turned abruptly and, noticing Irene, slammed the door shut, leaving her on the other side. Minutes later, the door reopened, but it wasn't Richard who was there. It was the maid, with a dismayed expression. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. The mistress said to tell you Mr. Richard won't be able to see you today. She asks that you come back another day by appointment." Irene felt her legs weaken. She leaned against the wall to keep from falling. "But does he know it's me? Does he know his mother is here?" The staff member lowered her eyes, her discomfort evident. "Mrs. Priscilla said she'll explain everything to him later. The taxi is already waiting outside." With a broken heart and suppressed tears, Irene collected her bag. The maid, in a furtive gesture of compassion, whispered, "Come back tomorrow morning. The mistress has a spa appointment on Tuesdays, leaves at 9 and only returns after lunch. Mr. Richard works from home on Tuesday mornings." Irene nodded, grateful for that small act of kindness. In the taxi, she finally let the tears flow as she watched the mansion recede. She couldn't understand how her son, the boy she had raised alone after her husband's departure, could allow his own mother to be treated as a stranger, an intruder. That night, staying in a modest guest house in the city center, Irene took the sky-blue dress from her suitcase. She carefully smoothed each crease, each hand-embroidered detail. It was her treasure, the materialization of a dream, to see her son marry wearing something made by her own hands. She hugged the dress to her chest and allowed herself to cry until she fell asleep, determined not to give up. Tomorrow would be another day. Tomorrow, she would see her Richard. Tuesday morning arrived with a fine drizzle, typical of London. Irene woke up even before the alarm clock, her heart racing with the anticipation of the reunion. She dressed simply, but chose her least worn blouse and meticulously combed her grey hair, tying it in a low bun. On her face, she tried to disguise the deep dark circles from the sleepless night with face powder. At 9:15, she was again before the condominium gates. This time, another doorman was on duty, an elderly man close to her age, with kind eyes and a northern English accent that made her feel less out of place. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I've come to visit my son, Richard Meadows, from House 32. The man consulted the system, frowning. "I don't have any Irene on the list today." "Please," she pleaded, her voice choked. "I'm his mother. I came from Willow Creek, North Carolina, just to see him. I traveled almost a whole day." The doorman looked around, checking if he was being watched, and then whispered, "I know Mr. Richard. A decent man always treats me with respect. If you really are his mother, I can't stop you. I'll let you in, but don't say it was me." With a nod of gratitude, Irene walked through the imposing gardens until she reached House 32. Her heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it wanted to leap from her chest. This time, instead of going to the main door, she went straight to the back, remembering the maid's tip. Through the kitchen window, she saw the same staff member from the day before, who, noticing her, made a discreet gesture indicating she should enter. "Mrs. Priscilla left a little while ago," she informed in a low voice. "Mr. Richard is in the office, second floor, end of the corridor. He doesn't know anything about yesterday." Irene thanked her with a quick hug and followed the instructions, climbing the marble staircase with hesitant steps. Each step seemed a challenge, not only due to her age, but also the weight of the emotions she carried. When she reached the indicated corridor, she saw a half-open door from which the sound of rapidly typed keys emanated. She stopped before the door, took a deep breath, and knocked lightly. "Marlene, I told you I'm busy. Leave the coffee on the table, please," came the reply from inside. That voice, the voice of her boy, now a man, made tears well up instantly. Irene gently pushed the door open and entered. Richard was with his back to her, before 3 monitors, typing frantically. His black hair, once curly like his father's, was now short and neat. His broad shoulders filled a navy blue dress shirt. "Richard," Irene called, her voice barely audible. The man turned abruptly, his eyes wide in shock. For a moment he was paralyzed, as if seeing a ghost. Then slowly he stood up. "Mother?" he asked, incredulous. "What are you doing here?" There was no anger in his voice, only genuine confusion. Irene took a step forward, her hands outstretched. "My son, it's been so long." Richard seemed to awaken from a trance. In 3 long strides he was before her, embracing her in an awkward but sincere hug. Irene closed her eyes, savoring that moment she had waited so long for. "Why didn't you say you were coming?" he asked, pulling back to look at her. "I would have prepared everything, sent a car to pick you up at the coach station." Irene frowned, confused. "But I did tell you, son. I spoke with Priscilla 2 weeks ago. Didn't she tell you?" A shadow passed over Richard's face. "No, she didn't mention anything." He looked at his mother, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. "You're thinner, and your hair. It's so white." "Time passes for everyone, my son." She smiled, touching his face. "But you're such a handsome man, so successful." Richard indicated an armchair, and Irene sat down, feeling the comfort of the expensive upholstery. He pulled up a chair, positioning himself in front of her. "How is life in Willow Creek? The house?" "Everything's the same, son. I still sew for the neighbors, tend the garden. Your room is just as you left it." A mixture of guilt and nostalgia crossed Richard's face. He opened his mouth to say something, but was interrupted by his cell phone ringing. He looked at the screen, his expression changing instantly. "It's Priscilla," he said, with evident tension. He answered, moving away slightly. "Hi, love. Yes, I'm working. What? No, I didn't know. Oh, yes, she's here with me." Irene watched, feeling the change in the air. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Richard responding increasingly tensely, only with monosyllables. When he hung up, his face was pale. "Priscilla is coming home," he announced. "She seems surprised you're here." "Son," Irene began, hesitant. "I need to tell you. Yesterday I came here, but—" Before she could continue, the office door burst open. Priscilla entered like a hurricane, her face contorted in a mask of false concern. "Irene, what a surprise!" she exclaimed, with a falsity that only Irene seemed to perceive. She approached, air-kissing near her cheeks. "Why didn't you let us know you were coming today? I would have cancelled my appointment." Irene felt a chill run down her spine. The lie was so blatant she didn't know how to react. "But I did tell you," she repeated, looking directly into her daughter-in-law's eyes. 2 weeks ago. And yesterday I was here." "Yesterday?" Priscilla interrupted with a forced laugh. "Imagine, Richard wasn't home yesterday. We were at a charity dinner until late. You must be confused." Richard looked from one to the other, clearly bewildered. Irene saw in her son's eyes a painful hesitation. He wanted to believe his mother. But years of manipulation by Priscilla had built an invisible wall. "Richard," Priscilla continued, her honeyed voice laden with venom. "Remember I told you about that old woman who showed up here last week claiming to be your aunt? It must be the same confusion." Irene felt her blood boil. How could she be so cruel, so calculating? She was about to protest when Priscilla delivered the final blow. "Darling, remember what the doctor said about your mother, about the episodes of confusion. She's already getting on in years." The words fell like blades on Irene. What doctor? What episodes? Was Priscilla implying she had mental problems? "There's no doctor," she protested, her voice trembling with indignation. "Richard, your last phone call was 3 months ago and we didn't even talk about health." Richard's face was a mask of doubt and discomfort. Priscilla approached him, placing her hand on his shoulder in a possessive gesture. "Love, let's take it easy. Your mother came from far away. She must be tired." She turned to Irene with false sweetness. Why don't you rest a bit? Marlene will prepare the guest room. The guest room is being renovated, Richard corrected. Oh, that's right, Priscilla feigned surprise. Well, she can stay in the staff room for now. It's simple but comfortable. Irene felt the blow, but maintained her dignity. Staff room. That's how her daughter-in-law saw her, as a maid, not as her husband's mother. Anywhere is fine, she replied, her voice firm. I just want to spend some time with my son. Priscilla smiled, that smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, of course. Richard has a very busy schedule, but I'm sure he'll find a few minutes for you between meetings. A few minutes, as if time with her own mother was a concession, a favor. Richard, finally seeming to awaken from a trance, intervened. I'm cancelling my meetings this afternoon. I want to show my mother the house, maybe take her to see the neighborhood. The look Priscilla gave her husband was glacial, but it quickly transformed into an artificial smile. What a wonderful idea, love. I'll keep your mother company while you finish your morning duties. Irene felt a shiver. The last thing she wanted was to be alone with that woman. But before she could protest, Priscilla was already leading her out of the office, her arm around her shoulders like a claw disguised as affection. Come on, Irene, I'll show you where you'll be staying. Oh, and that bag you brought yesterday. Unfortunately, we had to discard it. Rats, you know how it is? London has that problem. The office door closed, and Irene cast a last pleading look at her son, who seemed torn between the duty to work and the desire to protect his mother from something he himself didn't fully understand. The staff room was a small, functional room, with freshly painted white walls, a single bed, and a narrow wardrobe. Through the casement window, one could only see the high wall surrounding the property. Irene sat on the edge of the bed, her hands crossed in her lap, watching Priscilla, who remained standing by the door, as if guarding a prisoner. I hope it's adequate, Priscilla said, pronouncing the last word as if it were a veiled insult. Considering your origins, it must even be luxurious. Irene raised her chin, maintaining her dignity. My house in Willow Creek is simple but clean and honest. That's where I raised your husband alone after Sebastian left us. A dangerous glint lit up in Priscilla's eyes. Ah, yes, the humble past that Richard worked so hard to overcome. She adjusted the gold bracelet on her slender wrist. You know, Irene, we've built a reputation here. Richard is respected in the financial market. We frequent the best social circles. Do you understand what I mean? That my son is ashamed of his roots? Of his own mother? Irene's voice trembled, not from fear but from indignation. Priscilla took a step forward, abandoning the mask of politeness. Let's be direct. Your presence here is inconvenient. Richard has moved past that mediocre life. He doesn't need constant reminders of how much he had to struggle to get where he is. And I don't need my friends to know that my mother-in-law is a seamstress from a rural town in North Carolina. The blow was so direct that Irene felt as if she had been slapped. She took a deep breath, searching for strength somewhere within herself. Does my son know this? Does he know you're ashamed of his mother? For an instant, something akin to uncertainty crossed Priscilla's perfect face. Soon after, she recomposed herself. Richard and I understand each other perfectly. He knows that to maintain our social position, certain sacrifices are necessary. Before Irene could reply, Marlene the maid appeared at the door with a tray. Mrs. Priscilla, I brought some coffee for Mr. Richard's mother. The look Priscilla gave the staff member was pure venom. Marlene, how many times do I have to tell you not to interrupt my conversations? Sorry, ma'am. I thought the master's mother might be hungry after the journey. There was a subtle insubordination in Marlene's tone that did not go unnoticed by any of the three. Priscilla narrowed her eyes, but merely said, Leave it there and get back to your duties. Oh, and prepare lunch for 3 today. The lady will be joining us. When Marlene left, Priscilla turned to Irene, regaining her artificial smile. Well, I'll leave you to rest. We have lunch at noon. Try to look presentable. With those words, she left, closing the door a little harder than necessary. Irene let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Only then did she notice her hands trembling. The coffee on the tray exuded a strong and inviting aroma. Beside the elegant cup, a French roll with butter, certainly the simplest meal in the house, reserved for the unwelcome guest. But Irene didn't mind. She had long learned that pride doesn't fill stomachs. As she ate, she observed the room. On the wall opposite the bed there was a small bedside table with a framed photograph, the only decoration in the room. She got up to examine it better and felt her heart tighten. It was Richard as a child, no more than 5 years old, smiling with mud-stained cheeks, holding a frog in his small hands. Beside him, a younger Irene, with her still black hair in a braid, smiled with maternal pride. How had that photo ended up there, in the staff room? She turned the frame over and saw on the back, written in Richard's childlike handwriting, "Me and Mum, Spring 1995. A memory that, despite all of Priscilla's attempts, still resisted in that house. The door opened without warning, startling her. It was Marlene with a conspiratorial expression. "Mrs. Irene, I'm sorry to come in like this. The mistress is on the phone. She'll be a while. I wanted to show you something." She took a yellowed envelope from her apron pocket. "This arrived last week for Mr. Richard, sender from Willow Creek. I recognize the town's name because my cousin lives there. The mistress intercepted it, but I saved it before she destroyed it." With trembling hands, Irene took the envelope. It was from Mrs. Zelda, her neighbor and friend of decades. The letter was open, but the content seemed intact. A short note and some old photographs. "Dear Richard," the note read in Zelda's shaky handwriting, "So your mother never asked me to do this, but I feel it's my duty. While organizing my things, I found these memories of your childhood. You were so loved, boy. And your mother still waits for news every day. Longing doesn't kill, but it sickens the soul, Zelda." The photographs showed various moments: newborn Richard in Irene's arms, his first day of school, holding his mother's hand, a modest birthday party with a homemade cake, and, the one that touched her heart the most, teenage Richard, proudly wearing a colorful beaded necklace she herself had made for him. "She hasn't seen this yet," Marlene explained, "but she's taken other letters before. Tears them up, burns them. I've seen her do it many times." Irene felt a mixture of gratitude and horror. "Why are you helping me, Marlene?" The maid lowered her eyes. "My mother is also far away, in Northern Ireland. I know how it is." Then, in a lower voice, "And the mistress. She's not a good person. Mr. Richard deserves to know the truth." Before they could continue, they heard footsteps in the corridor. Quickly, Irene hid the envelope in her bag. Marlene pretended to straighten the bed when Priscilla appeared at the door. "What are you still doing here, Marlene? Lunch isn't going to prepare itself." "I'm going now, Mum. I just came to get the tray." When the maid left, Priscilla assessed the room with critical eyes, lingering on the photo frame Irene still held. "Ah, I see you've found an archaeological relic," she commented, sarcastically. "It must have been left over from when we cleaned the house for the current decor. An oversight." She extended her hand, clearly expecting Irene to hand over the photograph. But the elderly woman clutched the photo frame to her chest. "It's just a memory. It doesn't bother anyone here in the room." For a moment, Priscilla seemed about to forcibly snatch the object. She restrained herself, however, adjusting her fake smile. "As you wish. Our lunch will be served in half an hour. Richard will be present." She cast an evaluating look at Irene's simple clothes. "Perhaps you'd like to change. I have some pieces I no longer wear. I can lend them to you." The veiled insult was clear. Her clothes were not worthy of the dining table. Irene felt her face burn, but maintained her dignity. "I'm fine like this, thank you. These clothes were made by my own hands." Priscilla shrugged as if to say, "Suit yourself," and left. Irene took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that was growing within her. She was not a woman of conflict. Her whole life had been guided by conciliation, by the silent acceptance of difficulties. But now, faced with that woman's calculated cruelty, she felt an indignation she had never experienced before. Lunch was a tense experience. The dining room, with its noble wooden table accommodating 12 people, seemed to emphasize the chasm between the life Richard now led and his humble origins. Irene sat awkwardly in the upholstered chair, observing the absurd number of cutlery around the fine porcelain plate. Richard seemed torn between the genuine joy of being with his mother and the discomfort of seeing her in that environment. He asked questions about Willow Creek, about the neighbors, but whenever the conversation threatened to become more intimate or evoke deeper memories, Priscilla skillfully intervened, changing the subject. "And how is the sewing, Irene?" Priscilla asked, delicately cutting a piece of salmon. Do you still make those, what are they called again? Printed cotton dresses? Printed cotton, Irene corrected calmly. Yes, I still sew. That's how I supported your husband, how I paid for his studies. Richard shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. Mother used to work miracles with that old sewing machine, he commented with a shy smile. Remember that suit she made for my high school graduation? Everyone thought it was store-bought. A genuine spark of pride lit up Irene's eyes. I spent 3 sleepless nights finishing that suit. All your classmates in designer clothes, and you shone brighter than all of them. For a moment, something of the old complicity between mother and son rekindled. Priscilla noticed, and her face hardened. Speaking of clothes, she interrupted, I'm donating those old outfits of yours, Richard. Those country things, you know. I've already set everything aside for charity. Richard's smile instantly vanished. What old outfits? Those old shirts, that horrible brown suit you kept out of. Sentimentality. They're no longer good for anything. Our image needs to be impeccable, love. You always say that yourself. Irene noticed the manipulation. The brown suit, the one she had made with so much love, being discarded like trash. Son, she said in a soft voice, I brought something for you. It's in my suitcase. Priscilla rolled her eyes, impatient. Please, Irene, we're having lunch. Whatever it is, it can wait. But Richard, for the first time, ignored his wife. What did you bring, Mother? Some cheese puffs I made, just the way you always liked them. And, well, I also brought the blue dress I made to wear to your wedding. I never had the opportunity. A heavy silence fell over the table. Richard lowered his eyes to his plate, his expression closed. Priscilla let out a short, unpleasant laugh. Wedding? But we didn't invite her. The cruelty of the statement made even Richard look up, shocked. Priscilla. What? It's true. It was an intimate ceremony, only for people in our circle. Your mother wouldn't fit in there, Richard. You agreed yourself. Irene felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. She looked at her son, hoping, praying for a denial. But Richard merely looked away, confirming with his silence the terrible truth. He had agreed not to invite his own mother to his wedding. In that moment, something broke inside Irene. It wasn't just the pain of rejection, but the realization that her son, the one she had carried in her arms, who she had cradled through nights of fever, who she had taught to take his first steps, had chosen to deny her. She rose from the table with dignity, her legs trembling but her spine erect. Excuse me, she said, her voice hoarse. I need to rest a bit. Richard made a move to stand up too, but Priscilla placed her hand on his, stopping him. Let her go, darling. She's tired from the journey. As she walked away, Irene heard Priscilla whisper something about drama and emotional manipulation. She returned to the small staff room, closed the door, and finally allowed the tears to come. Sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at the photograph of simpler, truer times, Irene wondered how her son could have changed so much. How had that boy with an open smile and a kind heart transformed into this conflicted man, trapped between his mother's love and submission to his manipulative wife? At that moment, she heard a soft knock at the door. She quickly wiped her tears and straightened up. Come in, she said, expecting it to be Marlene. But it was Richard who opened the door. Richard entered hesitantly, like a stranger asking permission. His eyes, identical to his father's, dark brown, almost black, reflected an internal conflict that seemed to consume him. He closed the door behind him and stood there, hands in the pockets of his impeccably pressed dress trousers. Mother, he began, his voice low, I'm sorry about what happened at the table. Irene looked at her son, that man who seemed simultaneously familiar and foreign. The rigid posture, the carefully polished vocabulary, the perfectly trimmed beard, all of it belonged to a Richard she didn't know. Why, son? She asked simply. Why didn't you invite me to your wedding? Richard ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that made him look like the boy she had raised again. It was a small ceremony, he justified, unable to look her in the eye. Just Priscilla's close family, some colleagues from work, and I'm not close family. Irene's voice trembled. I, who spent sleepless nights when you had a fever, who sewed until my fingers bled to pay for your studies, who— Please, Mother, Richard interrupted, visibly uncomfortable. It's not that simple. Then explain it to me. Make me understand. He sat beside her on the narrow bed, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. "When I came to London, I only had the clothes on my back and that old backpack, remember? I went hungry, slept in hostels, worked like a dog, until I got an opportunity in the financial market." He paused, as if organizing his thoughts. "I met important people, people who could open doors. And I met Priscilla, your boss's daughter," Irene completed, remembering the little information she had received over the years. Richard nodded. "She introduced me to a world I didn't even know existed, a world of opportunities, of connections. And to be accepted into that world, I had to reinvent myself." "Reinvent yourself," Irene repeated bitterly. "Meaning, forget who you were, forget your origins, your mother." "That's not it," Richard protested, but without conviction. "It's just that certain things from the past, Priscilla thinks they might harm my professional image." "Certain things," Irene repeated. "You mean me?" Richard didn't answer, and his silence was more painful than any words. Irene felt her heart tighten, but not from sadness, from indignation. "Stand up," she ordered, with a firmness that surprised even herself. Disconcerted, Richard obeyed. Irene went to the small suitcase she had brought, opened it, and carefully, reverently, took out a folded dress. Sky blue, with delicate hand embroidery on the neckline, and hem, a work that had taken months to complete. "This is the dress I made for your wedding," she explained, spreading the garment on the bed. "Every stitch, every detail, was sewn with love, thinking of the day I would see my son marry." Richard looked at the dress, speechless. Irene continued, "When I heard you were getting married, even without an invitation, I started sewing. Nights and nights, between one job and another. My clients would ask, 'Who is this special dress for, Mrs. Irene?' And I would answer proudly, 'For my son's wedding in London. He's an important man now.'" Her voice faltered, but she quickly recovered. "On your wedding day, even without an invitation, I wore this dress. I sat in the living room at home, alone, imagining the ceremony. What the bride would be like, how elegant you would be, if you would have worn the blue tie I gave you for graduation." Silent tears streamed down Richard's face, who remained motionless, as if each word was a blade piercing his chest. "For 3 years I kept this dress, waiting for an opportunity to wear it before you, to show that despite everything I was still proud of my son." With trembling fingers, Richard touched the delicate fabric. "Mother, I—" The door burst open abruptly, interrupting the moment. Priscilla entered, her face a mask of false concern. "Ah, you're here. I was looking for you. What's this?" Her gaze fell on the dress. "Oh, the famous relic." She approached, examining the piece with ill-disguised disdain. "It's interesting. Handmade, isn't it? I imagine it was very suitable for Willow Creek." Irene met her daughter-in-law's gaze. "It was made with love, every stitch." "Love," Priscilla repeated, with a little laugh. "Well, love is important, but elegance too." She picked up the dress, holding it up as if examining an exotic curiosity. Simple cotton, isn't it? Hand-embroidered. Charming, in a way. Too bad it's so out of fashion." "Priscilla," Richard warned, sensing the provocation, but she ignored him, continuing her cruel scrutiny. "And this blue and so intense, almost countrified, don't you think, love?" She turned to her husband, seeking complicity. Richard, torn between loyalty to his wife and respect for his mother, remained silent, a silence Priscilla interpreted as agreement. "Well," she continued with false sweetness, "I think we can add a more sophisticated touch to this piece. You know what would be perfect?" Without waiting for an answer, she took a bottle of designer perfume from her pocket. "A little of my Chanel, to eliminate that little smell of the countryside." Before Irene or Richard could react, Priscilla generously sprayed the perfume onto the dress. "Priscilla, that's enough," Richard exclaimed, finally reacting. But the damage was done. The strong perfume permeated the fabric, overpowering the familiar scent of lavender that Irene always used on her clothes. It was more than a physical mark. It was a symbolic profanation of everything that dress represented. "There!" Priscilla exclaimed with false joy. "Now it looks like something that can be worn in London. Don't you think, Richard?" The look she gave her husband was an explicit challenge, and to Irene's desolation, Richard faltered. His eyes avoided both his mother and his wife, fixing on the floor. "I need to get back to work," he murmured, heading for the door. "I have a video conference in 5 minutes." And he left, leaving Irene alone with Priscilla and the profaned dress. "See?" Priscilla said, as soon as the door closed. Her tone was almost confidential, as if sharing a secret. "That's how it works, Irene. You may have given birth to Richard, but I created the man he is today. I shape his decisions, his choices. I define who enters and who leaves his life." Irene looked at the woman before her, beautiful, sophisticated, and utterly devoid of compassion. "You can control many things, Priscilla, but you cannot erase love. Richard is my son. No expensive perfume, no lie of yours can change that." For an instant, something akin to insecurity crossed Priscilla's perfect face. It quickly turned into suppressed anger. "I'll give you 2 days," she said coldly. 2 days to visit your son, satisfy your longing, and then go back to your hole in North Carolina. If you try to prolong your stay, if you try any emotional ploy to win Richard back, I'll have to take more drastic measures." "What kind of measures?" Irene challenged. Priscilla smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's just say I have connections with excellent rest homes for confused elderly people. A diagnosis of early dementia is so easy to get these days." The threat hung in the air like invisible poison. Priscilla placed the dress on the bed, as if discarding trash, and left without looking back. Alone, Irene looked at the dress, her treasure, her masterpiece, now stained by the invasive perfume and deliberate cruelty. Silent tears streamed down her wrinkled face. They were not tears of sadness alone, but of nascent determination. With trembling hands, she picked up the dress and left the room. She found her way to the laundry room where Marlene was folding clothes. "Mrs. Irene," the maid exclaimed, surprised. "What happened?" "I need your help, Marlene," she said, her voice firm. "I need a bucket of water, mild soap, and a quiet place." Marlene looked at the dress, then at the elderly woman's determined face, and understood. "You can use the service area. The mistress never goes there. I have coconut soap, the old-fashioned kind. It removes any smell." Grateful, Irene began her patient work. She dipped the dress in soapy water, washing it delicately, paying special attention to the embroidery so it wouldn't be damaged. As she scrubbed, she felt as if she was washing not only the fabric but her own dignity. Marlene, helpful, brought a small clothesline hidden behind a partition where Irene hung the dress to dry. Then she returned to her room, tired but determined. At night, when everyone was asleep, she silently got up. She returned to the laundry room, where the dress was almost dry. She took it back to her room, spread it on the bed, and, by the dim light of the bedside lamp, began to work. With needle and thread that she always carried in her sewing bag, she redid damaged stitches, corrected small imperfections caused by the washing, and then, on an impulse she herself couldn't explain, she turned the dress inside out and began to embroider on the inner lining near the heart her son's name, Richard. An intimate gesture, invisible to external eyes, but loaded with meaning. Like a talisman, a reminder that, despite everything, love persisted. When she finished, already in the early hours of the morning, she looked at her restored work. The smell of expensive perfume had disappeared, replaced by the soft aroma of coconut soap. The embroideries shone like new, and inside, hidden, was that name, her greatest pride and her greatest pain. She lay down exhausted, but with a new resolution in her heart. She would not leave in 2 days as Priscilla had demanded. She would not give up on her son without a fight. If there was one thing a life of hardship had taught her, it was persistence, the silent resistance of those who have no power, but have principles. With the blue dress carefully folded on the bedside table, Irene finally fell asleep, dreaming of a time when her son would look into her eyes again and see not only the simple woman from the countryside, but the mother who loved him unconditionally, with a love that neither time, nor distance, nor Priscilla's manipulation could erase. On the other side of the mansion, in the master bedroom, Richard also couldn't sleep. Beside him, Priscilla snored peacefully, oblivious to her husband's inner turmoil. He thought of the blue dress, the unspoken words, his mother's silent tears, And for the first time in many years, he began to question the choices he had made, the man he had become, and the price, the terrible price he had paid for success. The following morning brought with it a heavy silence that seemed to hang over the entire mansion. Irene woke up early, as she had always done throughout her life, the habit of someone accustomed to making the most of every hour of daylight to work. She dressed simply, but chose a light blue blouse that subtly matched the restored dress. In the kitchen, she found only Marlene, who was preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Mrs. Irene," the maid greeted her, with genuine sympathy. "Did you sleep well?" "As best I could," she replied with a tired smile. "And the master and mistress?" "Mr. Richard left early for a meeting. He said he'll be back for lunch." Marlene lowered her voice. "The mistress is still asleep. She took sleeping pills last night after an argument." "Argument?" Irene couldn't hide her concern. Marlene nodded as she placed a cup of coffee in front of the elderly woman. "Because of you. I overheard. Mr. Richard said he was tired of her attitude, that she had no right to treat his mother that way." She paused. "It was the first time I've seen him stand up to her like that." A small warmth of hope ignited in Irene's chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still something of her Richard, of the open-hearted boy with firm principles. Within that strange man her son had become. "There's something else, Mrs. Irene," Marlene continued, looking around to make sure they were alone. "Tomorrow there's a big event here, a party to celebrate Mr. Richard's promotion to company partner. All the bigwigs will be here, his bosses, important colleagues, even politicians." Irene immediately understood what that meant. "And Priscilla doesn't want me to be present," Marlene confirmed with a sad nod. "I heard her on the phone yesterday talking to Dr. Foster, a family friend psychiatrist, something about a discreet assessment this afternoon." A shiver ran down Irene's spine. Priscilla's veiled threat was becoming a reality, an attempt to declare her mentally incapacitated, to institutionalize her, to permanently separate her from her son. "Thank you for letting me know, Marlene," she said, squeezing the maid's hand with gratitude. After coffee, she retired to her room, where she picked up the blue dress, now completely dry and restored. She examined every detail, every stitch, perfect again or almost. Some marks remained invisible to inattentive eyes, but evident to anyone who knew the story of that fabric. Like battle scars, Irene thought, scars that told a story of resistance. The rest of the morning passed in silent tension. Irene didn't see Richard again. Apparently he was busy with preparations for the next day's party, as Priscilla had stated. Or perhaps being deliberately kept away from her. At night, during dinner, served in Irene's room under the pretext that she needed to rest, Marlene brought alarming news. "The mistress is furious with the doctor," she whispered as she collected the tray. "She called another one to come tomorrow before the party, and she ordered you to be locked in here during the event." Irene felt a chill. "Locked?" Marlene nodded sadly. "From the outside, so that you don't disturb the guests with inappropriate behavior." Those were her words. A cold determination settled in Irene's heart. She would not be silenced. She would not be hidden like a shame. "Marlene, I need one last favor from you," she said, taking the maid's hands. "If you help me, I promise it won't cause you any trouble." After dinner, alone in her room, Irene picked up the blue dress. She gazed at it for a long time, running her fingers over the embroidery, over the hidden name in the lining. Then, with decision, she put it on. The fabric embraced her body like an old friend. She adjusted the neckline, smoothed the skirt. She looked at herself in the small mirror of the adjacent bathroom. The reflection showed an elderly woman, yes, with wrinkles that told stories of sacrifice and love, but also a dignified woman, elegant in her simple way, dressed in the color of the sky and hope. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she waited. The plan was simple. Marlene had given her a sturdy hairpin. As soon as she was locked in the room, she would use the hairpin to open the lock, a skill she had learned in her youth from her carpenter father. Then, when the party was in full swing, she would appear discreetly, not to cause a scandal, but just to see her son in his moment of glory, so that he would know that, despite everything, his mother was still there, still loved him, was still proud of him. As she waited, she remembered all the times she had silently fought for Richard, the extra jobs she took to pay for his school books, the sleepless nights when he was sick, The dreams she had postponed, the opportunities she had refused, all so that he would have chances she never had. She regretted nothing. Even now, facing Priscilla's cruelty and her son's painful indifference, she regretted nothing, because a mother's love, she concluded, was not an investment awaiting return. It was a gift, unconditional and eternal. Outside, she heard footsteps in the corridor. The key turned in the lock, trapping her like a prisoner. "Forgive me, son," she whispered to the silence of the room, "but tonight you will see your mother." The mansion buzzed with the frenzy of final preparations for the grand event. Uniformed staff hurried about, carrying trays, adjusting floral arrangements, polishing crystal glasses. The sound of the chamber orchestra tuning their instruments in the main hall mingled with the tense instructions of the party organizer, an elegant woman with a tablet in her hands and an expression that tolerated no imperfections. In the master bedroom, Richard adjusted his tie before the mirror. His fingers trembled slightly, a reflection not of nervousness for the party, but of the emotional turmoil of the past few days. His mother's presence had awakened memories and feelings he thought forgotten, or more honestly, that he had deliberately buried during his social ascent. Priscilla entered, dazzling in a red designer dress, sparkling jewels on her neck and wrists. She approached her husband, adjusting his tie with precise gestures. "Everything's perfect," she commented with satisfaction. "The Mendons have just arrived. They brought that French wine you love. And I confirm that the governor will come, even if briefly." Richard nodded, distant. Priscilla noticed. "What's wrong? You should be beaming. This is your night, darling, the culmination of everything we've worked for." "Worked for," Richard repeated, with a hint of bitterness. "Yes, I suppose so." Priscilla narrowed her eyes, assessing her husband. "Still thinking about her, aren't you? The pathetic dress scene." Richard turned, facing his wife. "She's my mother, Priscilla, and she's locked in a room while we celebrate my promotion. How do you think I feel?" Priscilla sighed, as if needing to explain something obvious to a child. "Richard, we've talked about this. Your mother isn't well. Mentally, I mean. Dr. Albright will come tomorrow for a more conclusive assessment. Until then, it's better for her to rest. A party of this magnitude would be too stressful for someone in her condition." "And what condition would that be exactly?" Richard questioned, with a firmness that surprised both of them. "Because Dr. Foster didn't seem so concerned." Priscilla adjusted a lock of hair, buying time. "Foster is competent as a general practitioner, but limited as a psychiatrist. Dr. Albright specializes in senile dementia and age-related disorders." The word dementia hit Richard like a slap. For a moment, the terrible possibility that his mother was truly ill, that he was failing her again, paralyzed him. Priscilla noticed his hesitation and attacked. "Think, darling. Why would she come without warning after so long? Why would she make up stories about me throwing her cheese puffs in the bin, about intercepted letters?" She placed her hand on her husband's face in a calculatedly affectionate gesture. "I know it's painful to accept, but your mother needs professional care, not social exposure." Doubt infiltrated Richard's heart again. What if Priscilla was right? What if the signs had been there from the beginning, and he, blind with guilt and childhood memories, couldn't see them? "Come on," Priscilla continued, seizing the psychological advantage. "Our guests are arriving. This is your night, remember." Reluctantly, Richard allowed himself to be led to the hall, where dozens of smiling faces awaited him, powerful executives, influential politicians, elegant socialites. An entire world built on appearances and strategic connections. His world now. Meanwhile, in the staff room, Irene worked with the hairpin on the lock. Her hands, calloused by decades of sewing, operated with surprising precision. After a few minutes of careful attempts, she heard the satisfying click of the mechanism yielding. She opened the door cautiously, checking if the corridor was empty. The party music reached her muffled, along with the murmur of conversations and laughter. Following the plan, she went to the back stairs, the one used by staff, which Marlene had shown her. She descended silently, the blue dress rustling softly with each step. On the lower floor, the activity was intense. Waiters circulated with trays, cooks finalized appetizers, the organizer's assistants rushed back and forth. No one paid attention to the elderly lady who moved discreetly among them, an invisibility that, for the first time, Irene was grateful for. She found a strategic spot near the main hall, a small niche partially covered by a heavy curtain from where she could observe without being seen. From there she glimpsed her son in the center of the hall, surrounded by admirers, smiling that smile she knew was only partially true. Beside him, Priscilla shone perfectly at ease in that opulent environment. For a few minutes, Irene simply observed, absorbing every detail of that life that was simultaneously so close and so distant from hers. She saw how Richard gestured when speaking, a habit he had inherited from his father, how he ran his hand through his hair when he was slightly nervous, something he had done since childhood, how his smile, despite everything, still had that slight asymmetry at the right corner that had always made him so charming. She didn't plan to interfere, she just wanted to witness, to be present even if invisible. But fate had other plans. A hurried waiter bumped into a nearby tray, knocking over a glass that shattered on the floor. The sudden noise made several faces turn in that direction, including Priscilla's, whose gaze by chance met the niche where Irene was hiding. For a moment of pure shock, the two women stared at each other across the distance. Then Priscilla's face contorted into a mask of fury. Abandoning the conversation mid-sentence, she quickly moved towards Irene. Instinctively, the elderly woman recoiled, but it was too late. Priscilla reached her, grabbing her arm with surprising force. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, dragging her into a side corridor away from curious glances. "How did you get out of the room?" Irene remained dignified, despite the treatment. "I came to see my son. I didn't intend to interfere." "Your son?" Priscilla repeated with disdain. "Richard is my husband. We built a life together, a life you are not part of." "I am his mother," Irene replied, simply. "No one can change that." Priscilla's calculated coldness finally broke. With a sharp movement, she dragged Irene back into the main hall, where the party continued. "Attention!" Priscilla shouted, her voice cutting through the music and conversations. "We have an intruder." The entire hall turned to them. Richard, in the center of a group of executives, paled at seeing his mother exposed in such a humiliating way. "This woman," Priscilla continued, pointing at Irene as if presenting a criminal, "has invaded our home. She is suffering from delusions, believes she is Richard's mother." A murmur of astonishment ran through the crowd. Irene, despite the humiliation, kept her spine erect, her chin held high. Dressed in the blue she had sewn with so much love, she seemed strangely majestic in her simplicity. "Richard," Priscilla called, her tone falsely sweet, contrasting with the cruelty of her actions. "Darling, call security, please. This poor woman needs to be removed." All eyes turned to Richard, who remained motionless, his face a mask of shock and shame. Irene looked directly at him, not with anger or accusation, but with the same unconditional love as always. "Son," she said simply, her voice clear and firm. That single word seemed to break something within Richard. He took a step forward, then another, approaching the two women who marked the opposite poles of his existence. Priscilla, sensing her husband's hesitation, attacked again. "She's ill, Richard. We hired doctors, remember? She's confused, making up stories." "Stories?" Irene's voice rose, serene but powerful. "Or truths you try to hide, Priscilla. Like the letters you intercepted, the photographs you burned, the lies you told." Priscilla let out a forced laugh, looking at the guests as if sharing a joke. "See? Typical delusions. It's sad, really. Age does that to people." Then, in a final gesture of cruelty, she grabbed the sleeve of Irene's blue dress. "And this rag? She believes it's a fine dress. Pathetic." With a violent pull, she tore the fabric from the shoulder to the waist. The sound of tearing fabric echoed through the now completely silent hall. Irene felt as if her own heart was being ripped apart. She looked at the destroyed dress, her treasure, her pride, her masterpiece of love. "Don't tear my dress," she said, with a dignity that contrasted with the violence of the act. "It's all I have left from my son's wedding." Something fell from the pocket of the torn dress, a small object that clinked as it hit the marble floor, the colorful beaded necklace that Richard wore in his teenage photograph, the one Irene had made for him so long ago, and that she had kept as a souvenir. Richard looked at the necklace, then at the torn dress, finally at his mother's face, the same brown eyes that had watched over his sleep in childhood, that had filled with pride at every small achievement of his, that now looked at him with a mixture of pain and unconditional love. And something within him shattered. "Enough, Priscilla," he said, his voice low but filled with an authority no one there had ever heard. He stepped forward, placing himself between his wife and his mother. He bent down and picked up the necklace from the floor. He held it in his hands, like a precious relic. "This necklace," he murmured, more to himself than to others. "I got it for my 12th birthday. My mother made it with her own hands." He turned to the guests, many of whom seemed deeply uncomfortable with the scene. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the incident. This," he pointed to Irene with a gesture of profound respect, "is Irene Meadows, my mother." Priscilla let out a strangled sound of rage. "Richard, what are you doing?" He continued, ignoring the interruption. "A woman who raised a son alone after being abandoned by her husband, who worked as a seamstress, laundress, cleaner, anything honest to give me an education, who never had luxury but never lacked the essentials, dignity, values, love." He turned to Priscilla, his eyes finally clear of the fog of manipulation that had blinded him for so long. "And you, Priscilla, you have lied to me. You have manipulated, hidden, destroyed connections that should be sacred." "She's delusional," Priscilla screamed, her face contorted in a mask of desperation and rage. "Don't you see you're being manipulated by a senile old woman?" Richard shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. "No, Priscilla. For years I was manipulated by you. I was convinced to be ashamed of my origins, to hide my mother like a dirty secret, to value status and appearances above true bonds." He turned to Irene, taking her wrinkled hands in his. "Mother, forgive me. For everything, for the silence, for the cowardice, for every moment I allowed them to treat you as less than the extraordinary woman you are." Silent tears streamed down Irene's wrinkled face. They were not tears of sadness, but of relief, of redemption, of recognition. "Son," she said simply, and in that single word was contained all the forgiveness Richard needed. Priscilla, seeing that she was losing control of the situation, attempted one last blow. "Richard, think about what you're doing. Your career, your social position, everything we worked for." "No, Priscilla," Richard interrupted firmly. "Everything I worked for. While you worried about appearances, I built something real, a company, results. And you know what I realized today? That the work ethic, the persistence, the integrity that got me here, I learned it all from her." He pointed to Irene. "From my mother." He turned to the guests again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but this party is over. Thank you all for coming, but I have urgent family matters to resolve." A murmur ran through the crowd, but surprisingly, several of those present seemed to approve of his attitude. Some even applauded discreetly as they began to leave. Dr. Foster, who had observed everything from a corner, briefly approached Richard, squeezing his shoulder in a silent gesture of support. When the last guest left, only the three remained in the hall, Richard, Irene, and Priscilla, whose face had transformed into a mask of pure hatred. "You'll regret this," she hissed at her husband. "I'll destroy you, your career, everything." Richard smiled, a calm smile of someone who finally finds clarity after years of confusion. "No, Priscilla, you won't, because contrary to what you think, my professional value does not depend on your social influence. It depends on my work, my competence, qualities I inherited from my mother." Priscilla looked from one to the other, comprehension finally dawning on her. She had lost. With one last look of contempt, she turned on her heels and left the hall. Alone with Irene, Richard finally allowed himself to cry. Not tears of shame or remorse, but of relief, of liberation, like a child finding his way home after years lost in the forest. "Mother," he said, holding her hands, "we'll fix your dress, every stitch, every detail, together." Irene smiled through her own tears. "Some tears can be sown, son. Others leave scars that become part of the fabric. The important thing is that love remains, even when the cloth wears out." And there in the middle of the empty hall, mother and son embraced, not as the humble seamstress and the successful entrepreneur, but simply as two people who, after a long and painful detour, had finally found their way back to each other. Months later, in a small renovated house on the outskirts of London, Irene sat on the porch, sewing. Beside her, a box contained the blue dress, no longer torn but carefully restored. Every stitch of the tear had been sewn with gold thread, transforming the scar into an element of beauty and strength, a visible reminder of the journey taken. Richard, who now divided his time between the company and the capital and frequent visits to his mother, appeared at the door. He had changed in recent months, not only externally with simpler clothes and the return of his naturally curly hair, but internally. His eyes had regained that sparkle Irene knew so well, the sparkle of authenticity, of inner peace. "Ready for lunch, Mother?" he asked, smiling. "I made that rice with pequi that you taught me." "Almost ready, son," she replied, putting the finishing stitches on the fabric she was working on. A new dress, also blue but different, lighter, freer. As she put away her sewing, Irene reflected on the winding paths life had traced, on how sometimes we need to get completely lost to find our true essence, on how love, true unconditional love, can withstand any storm, overcome any obstacle, fix even the deepest tears, and on how in the complex fabric of existence it is precisely our scars that tell the truest, most human stories. It is they that, in the end, make us not only stronger, but more authentic, more complete. Richard approached, helping her to stand up. Together they walked into the house where the aroma of homemade food filled the air, where new memories were woven over old ones, day after day, stitch by stitch, like the invisible threads of destiny that even when they seem broken always find a way to reconnect. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Irene and Richard's story has touched your hearts. To continue on this journey of emotions, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking to your left. If this narrative about love, forgiveness, and redemption touched your soul, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of human relationships. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your comments and knowing what this story meant to you.